We're going to continue on with our subject matter, which is this beginner's book in the madhab of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, in his school of law that is based on certain fundamentals, etc. Of course, based on the Quran and the Sunnah. But when we say a school of law for a particular Imam, like Imam Shafi'i, it just means that Imam Shafi'i, he put a lot of effort and he made his due diligence in extracting a judgment from the Quran and the Sunnah and the consensus that has not already been explicitly mentioned in Islam. And so even amongst the companions this occurred, and so that continued to occur, and it continues to occur until our time. So those scholars that they're qualified to do that, they're called mujtahid scholars. It means that they have the religious permission, they have been given the ability, the authority in Islam to be able to deduce judgments directly from the Quran and the Hadith, because they meet the criteria that is necessary for the person to be qualified to do that. And among that criteria is that they be a memorizer of Hadith and that they know the biographies of each individual in the chain. And so that, and they would know also that narration that says abrogated, if it's not abrogated, etc., so that they wouldn't deduce a wrong judgment. And they have to know the consensus of the prior generations, and they have to know, for example, all the verses of the Quran related to the law and all the hadith that are related to the law. They have to have above average intelligence, they have to be super sharp mentally, they have to be trustworthy. So there is a lot that goes into being a mujtahid. Not just anybody can do it. Of course, that is reserved, and the ability to deduce directly from the Quran and the Sunnah is only reserved for those mujtahid scholars that are qualified. The mujtahid scholar is not the entry-level scholar, because there is a level of scholarship that is below the mujtahid. There's 3 levels that are below the mujtahid, and in none of those levels are they allowed to deduce judgments directly from the Quran and the Hadith. So if that's the case with people who are legitimately scholars and have reached a certain level of knowledge, but they haven't reached the level of being a mujtahid, if even they are religiously prevented or religiously not given the permission to deduce judgments directly from the Quran and the Sunnah, then for sure someone who's not even an entry-level scholar, for sure someone like that is not allowed to supposedly read the Quran on his own and read the Hadith on his own and then say such and such a matter is halal or such and such a matter is haram. So for example, even things that, for example, did not occur in the past, the mujtahid scholars, when that thing would occur, the Muslims need to know the judgment of it before they proceed in it. Because as it is known, a well-known rule in the Islamic law is that it is haram, it's forbidden to engage in any matter, whether that be a contract, whether that be anything to do with the Muslim's life. It's forbidden to enter into that, to engage into that, to take the steps to that, to do that. It's forbidden to do that before knowing what is the halal of it and what is the haram of it. So it's not like you step into a situation without knowing whether it's haram or halal, and then later you find out, oh, it's actually haram, and now you backtrack. That's forbidden, to engage in something without knowing the judgment of it. So when something new occurs that didn't occur before and its judgment is not explicitly mentioned in the Quran and the Hadith, so the Muslims need to know if it's haram or halal so they can know whether they can do it or not. And so that's one of the roles that the mujtahid scholar that he is fitted for, is that he gives the Muslims that judgment. And so in those cases, these mujtahids, they sometimes agree, and they all agree on the judgment of this matter, and so it would be a consensus. And so once that consensus is established, those that come after that generation, they're not allowed to breach it, because the consensus becomes a religious evidence to the level of the Quran and the Hadith, and the fundamentals of the law. And like we mentioned before, we will inshallah delve into the fundamentals of the law. But for now, we're going over this beginner's book in the school of Imam Shafi'i. If you hear something that seems foreign to you, it could be because you've heard the judgment according to the school of law of Imam Abu Hanifa, or the school of law of Imam Malik, depending on what region you're from. So, for example, like in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh and Afghanistan and the ex-Soviet bloc and all the other stands, it's mostly Abu Hanifa. They mostly follow the madhab in the Islamic law according to Imam Abu Hanifa. And in Asham and Indonesia and other parts of the world, they follow Shafi'i. And in North Africa, like Morocco, Algeria, these places, they follow Imam Malik mostly. But that doesn't mean that we're not able to, let's say, follow the madhab of Imam Malik or follow the madhab of Imam Abu Hanifa, no matter where we are. We can follow any of the judgments from those mujtahids, and as long as we do it and we do it properly, and we do it the way that that imam, let's say, the way that he, according to his madhab, with the conditions and the integrals and the validators, and the person knowing how to do it according to that imam. So alhamdulillah, we reached to page 48, starting a new chapter, performing Istinjā. We'll be reading, like we said, the top part first, and then we will continue with the lower portion below the line. Remember, the top part is called the metan, the text, and the bottom part, it is called the explanation. So the author said, performing Istinjā. Istinjā is obligatory after urination and defecation. So this term Istinjā, it is an Arabic term, and in the religious context it means removing what was left, or the traces of the filth that came out of you, so that it's pure, so that part is pure, or that part is clean. So it's not specific to clean yourself after urination and defecation, but those are the most common times when the Muslim would perform Istinjā. But we're going to explain. The author said, the best is to make Istinjā with stones and then to follow up with water. It is permissible to use water only, or use 3 stones that clear the area. If one wanted to settle on one of them only, then water is better. One refrains from facing the qibla or turning one's back to it in the open land when urinating and defecating, and refrains from urinating and defecating in still water, under the fruit-bearing tree, in the pathway, the shade, and in a hole. One does not talk while urinating or defecating, and does not face or turn one's back to the sun or moon. So all of these things that we're mentioning here, except for facing the qibla or turning one's back in open land, all of those and everything except that would be disliked to do. So facing the qibla or turning one's back to the qibla while urinating and defecating in an open land, meaning without there being any barriers. So in that case, this would be forbidden. This is a sin of the private part. And so it should be avoided. So we're going to go over the conditions and the things that make it forbidden. But the rest of the things are disliked to do. So now we're going to go into the explanation, the bottom portion. It says linguistically, Istinjā means to get rid of something. So according to the Arabic language, that's the meaning. The one who cleans the elementary outlet cleans them from najasa. This is why it is called Istinjā. Yani the person who is performing, the Muslim who is performing this Istinjā, what he is getting rid of is the filth, and the traces of the filth that are upon his exit when he answers the call of nature. So this is why it's called Istinjā Islamically. And so this shows, on the side note, this shows is another proof for the validity of Islam and the perfection of Islam. That it is our obligation as Muslims that we clean ourselves and in a specific way after using the bathroom. The author said, cleaning one's elementary outlets after urinating or defecating is an obligation before praying. So this is the judgment of Istinjā. Okay, the judgment of Istinjā. It's not like optional, and it's something that must be done. It has to be done before praying. This means that it's not an obligation to do it right after urination or defecation, but before one prays. One does it, and one does not contaminate oneself with the najasa. So, and usually when a person learns, they learn and they make the Istinjā as soon as they finish, let's say, using the bathroom. But it is possible that a person, they would be able to delay making the Istinjā until they're about to pray, because in order for the prayer to be valid, they cannot have any unexempted filth on their body, clothes, or place that they're praying. So if they have the traces of the filth that came out of them on their body still, then their prayer won't be valid. So this is why it's an obligation to perform this Istinjā before the prayer. However, if the person is able to, let's say, delay making the Istinjā without contaminating himself, then he is able to do that, as long as he makes the Istinjā before he prays. So the author said, for example, if one urinates and his urine dries, one can delay performing Istinjā until prayer, but before praying. It is an obligation on one to make Istinjā from the exiting of urine, feces, and anything that exits from the eliminatory outlets if it is wet, except mani. So mani is an Arabic term, and Islamically it's referring to the sexual spermatic fluid or the reproductive fluid, which is a fluid that exists in both males and females, that when these two fluids, when they combine together, and then that fluid becomes lodged or embedded in the uterus of the female, then this is how pregnancy occurs. So that's the meaning of mani. Now in the English language, they have a name for this fluid for males, but they do not have a name for it for women. The name that they call it for males is semen. But so women have semen, and they have this liquid that it is the liquid of reproduction. Without those two liquids of the male and female combining or coming together, the pregnancy will not occur. So if mani exits from the Muslim, he's not obligated to make Istinjā. So this is what the author means when he's saying the exiting of urine, feces, and anything that exits from the eliminatory outlets if it is wet, except mani, it's an obligation to make Istinjā from that. So So usually what comes out of the person's eliminatory outlets is urine and feces. But if something else were to come out of it, except mani, then it's an obligation to make istinjā from that thing, whether it was normal or abnormal, as long as what exits is wet. The author said, if, however, what exits is dry, and so it does not contaminate the outlet, such as the feces of a camel that comes out dry, then making istinjā is not an obligation. One can make wudu and pray without making istinjā from it. So basically, if something were to come out of the human dry, not really sure what the significance is of mentioning the feces of the camel, but it is possible that a human, let's say, something would come out of him that is not wet. It is not wet, and it's dry. So if it's dry, in that case, we don't say it's an obligation on him to make istinjā because it came out dry. So the condition, in order for it to be an obligation for the istinjā to be made for the material that came out of the human from his eliminatory outlets, then it's that it's wet, that it's moist. So when we say eliminatory outlets, and we're referring to specific things, so that would be the vaginal opening of the female and her urethra, and also the urethra of the man and the anus of both the male and the female. Those are the eliminatory outlets. So if someone, let's say blood comes out of the eliminatory outlet, or if, let's say, worms come out of their eliminatory outlet, if they're wet, if they're moist, then after those things come out of them, the Muslim is obligated to make istinjā. So that's what we mean when we say whether what comes out of them is normal or abnormal, except for the mani. The mani, if it comes out, we don't say that it's an obligation to make istinjā, because in the school of Imam Shafi'i, the mani is judged as pure, it's not filthy. So then the author said, if, however, what exits is dry, and so it does not contaminate the outlet, such as the feces of a camel that comes out dry, then making istinjā is not an obligation. One can make wudu and pray without making istinjā from it. So it appears that perhaps it was just used like as drawing a similarity. So it's possible that the human being might defecate something that is dry, like the way that the feces of a camel is dry. Then the author said, it is permissible for one to make istinjā with water or stone. That is, one can make istinjā with anything that is uprooting, pure, tahir, solid, dry, and not respected. So, like we mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, there's two things that the Muslim can use to fulfill the obligation of istinjā. He can use water, or he can use something that has these characteristics. Uprooting, meaning that it takes whatever traces of filth off. Pure, meaning it itself is not filthy, it's pure substance. Solid, meaning it has to be something that is solid as opposed to something that is something that disintegrates, like sand. And it has to be dry, so the thing that the Muslim uses to clean himself after using the bathroom has to be something dry. It cannot be something wet. So the person should not use wet wipes, for example. And if a Muslim used wet wipes, his istinjā won't be valid. The other characteristic is and not respected. So the thing that the Muslim uses to make istinjā has to be something that's not religiously respected. So, for example, it would be invalid for the Muslim to use a piece of bread, for example, to make istinjā with it. Or, something that, like I say, is food, that's edible, like the food of a human. It would not be permissible or valid to make istinjā with something that is respectable Islamic. And for sure, if someone, let's say, they do something blasphemous, like if they take like a page of an Islamic book and then they use it to make istinjā, then of course that would be blasphemy if the person knows that that page has or is from an Islamic book or that it has an honored name. So if the person wants to use, let's say, paper, then it has to make sure that there's no honored words on it. He has to make sure that it doesn't have the name of Allah on it. He has to make sure that it doesn't have the names of angels, actually referring to angels, etc. So if someone uses, let's say, a page of an Islamic book to make istinjā, their istinjā won't be valid and they would have committed blasphemy, and if they knowingly do that. So an example of something that fulfills all those characteristics is like the stone. So someone, let's say they take a rock and they use it to clean themselves after urinating or defecating, then this would be valid because the rock is uprooting, the rock is pure, the rock is solid, the rock is dry, and the rock is not Islamically respected. The author said anything like that can do the job of the stone. By uprooting, we exclude things that are not uprooting, like glass or bamboo. The glass, because it has the smooth surface, it's just going to smear the filth. Same thing for the bamboo. By pure tahir, we exclude not just filthy matters, such as animal feces, even if they are dry, solid, and uprooting. So like a very hardened, dried piece of animal feces, it would not be valid to make istinjā with that. It is not valid to make istinjā with them because they are najis, filthy. By solid, we exclude sand and the like. By dry, we exclude wet things, like a piece of material that is wet. By saying not respected, we exclude respected matters, like a paper containing religious knowledge. In fact, it is kufr, disbelief, to use it for istinjā. Yani, the one who does that exits from Islam, if one knows it has religious material on it. Another example of a respected matter is the cover of the Quran, even if no words are on it and it is separated from the Quran. Still, it is sinful to use for istinjā because it was a cover for the Quran. Also, we exclude food that is mostly eaten by people or common between people and animals. It is invalid to use it for istinjā, any food that is mostly eaten by humans or food that is common between people and animals. Also, like the food of the people, is the bone of an animal slaughtered according to Islamic law. It is invalid to use this bone for istinjā because Allah covers this bone with meat and the believers among the jinn eat from it. This is why the Prophet ﷺ told us not to use it for istinjā. That's what I know. I'll look into it. So the one who uses a cover of the Quran to make istinjā, for sure this person is belittling the Quran and they blaspheme. The author said, it is better to make istinjā by using stones first, or what replaces the stone, and then water. Because with the stone, one does not touch the najasa with one's hands. The stone does not remove the traces of the najasa, it removes the physical entity. Only water removes the physical entity and the traces. Hence, if one uses both, one removes the physical part without touching it and removes the traces with water. So, a thing that's like the stone and in modern times it's toilet paper. So basically the Muslim makes istinjā with toilet paper, and it has to make sure it's dry. You can't use wet toilet paper and you can't use wet wipes. And if you just use wet toilet paper or wet wipes to make istinjā, it would not be valid, and he would still be obligated to perform istinjā, and he would have committed a sin by that. So here, the author is saying the ideal way to make istinjā is for the person to first use the material or the instrument that's like stone. So we're going to say toilet paper for practical purposes. So the best way to do it is first you use the toilet paper to clean the spot where the filth came out of you. So you remove the physical entity of the filth that came out of you until now what's left is just the traces of it. So not the physical entity, but let's say some of its attributes. And also the judgment of that spot as being contaminated with filth, and it remains in the judgment of being contaminated with filth until it is purified. And the only thing that purifies in the Shafi'i school is the water, the pure purifying water, as we mentioned in the early chapters. So first he uses the stone to remove the physical entity of the najasa, and then one pours the water on. Then one washes it with water. And so alhamdulillah, Muslims are very, very clean. And this is something that goes back over 1,000 years. And as you know, anyone who studies history, there was a long period of time where the non-Muslims, and this is something known, this is something that even the non-Muslims admitted, they teach it in universities, they teach it in history, colleges, even in high school, that these non-Muslims, they were very unhygienic. Some of them, and these were like the prominent ones among them, we're not talking about like homeless people or people that are like insane in the street and they live on the street. No, we're talking about their monarchs and their queens and their kings and their royalty. They used to, one of them said about themselves that they only took a bath 2 times in their whole entire life, and it was a woman. I think she said, and one of the 2 times was when she got married. But the other time, I don't know what it was. But that just shows you to what level of disgustingness that the non-Muslims had in the past. And why am I saying that? Because nowadays, the secularists, those people that, that think that the best way to be or the best way to live is like whatever man invents, like the secularists, like the atheists, like, these people who they don't want to admit that we have to live according to the way that God commanded. The secularists who want to, they want to propagate and persuade every whim of humankind, and that they should just live however they want, But nowadays in modern times, they really have a very arrogant rhetoric, they think about themselves that they are superior to, let's say, Muslims who follow the law. They think that they're the most hygienic, they think that they're the most clean, they think that, they're the ones that are the ideal humans. When Muslims have been cleaning themselves for over 1,000 years, and they clean themselves properly, at a time when in Europe, right, in a place that is so hateful towards Islam, where they would just throw their feces and their excrement and their urine in the street. They had a bucket and they just emptied the contents of the bucket out of the window. So if you happened to be walking by, you get hit with a bucket full of excrement. So, and of course, not to mention the bubonic plague which stemmed from being dirty. And Muslims, they had irrigation systems, and they had plumbing systems, and they had flowing water. This was over 1,000 years ago. And even like, for example, dental hygiene, the Muslims have the siwak that they've been using for over 1,000 years that cleans the teeth, strengthens the gums, freshens the breath, etc. While these non-Muslims literally invented perfume because of how bad they stunk, so that they can tolerate the smell. And still until today we find many non-Muslims who have a strange relationship with hygiene. Like there's been many reports or like admissions and confessions of non-Muslims that say that they only take that they don't even really scrub themselves when they take a bath, that they just let the water flow on their body, and subhanAllah. So yeah, we have a comment in the chat, and I mean the Muslims of this nation, the Muslims of the nation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which it's been over 1,000 years since the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But of course, that's not excluding the Muslims that came before the nation of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they also were clean because that was revealed in their law. But I'm highlighting the modern era because nowadays the secularists and people that think like them, they think that humanity has supposedly progressed by distancing themselves from Islamic values, and that's not the case, subhanAllah. Our Master Umar, he said, نحن قوم أعزنا بالإسلام. He said, we are a people who find glory throughout Islam, or have become glorious throughout Islam. And if we seek glory through other than Islam, we'll never reach it, we'll never have it. So the glory and the goodness is through being Muslim, and through following the Islamic law. So the reason that it's better, the author said, the reason that it's better to start with the stone or toilet paper first and then use the water is because using the stone or using the toilet paper, you won't have to touch the filth with your hands. As opposed to, say, using water first or using water only. If it was to clean oneself from defecation, then obviously, as the water is flowing, he's rubbing the spot to purify it. So by using the stone, it prevents coming into contact with the filth. Then he said, it is permissible to use either water or stones, but in using stones, one needs to take into consideration the minimum number of stones required for the validity of Istinjā are 3 stones. So if one cleans the area with 1 stone, all the physical entity and what remains are just the traces that can only be removed by water or similar. It is still an obligation to wipe more times because the minimum is to wipe 3 times. Also, if 3 stones do not clean the area, one adds as much as needed to clean the area. If the number of stones used is an even number, it is sunnah to add 1 to make it an odd number. So to simplify that, basically, if the Muslim is going to use only a stone or toilet paper to clean himself after using the bathroom, then there's certain conditions that he has to follow in order to make sure that he does it in a valid way. One of them is that he has to wipe that area at least 3 times. So either he uses 3 separate pieces of toilet paper, or he uses, let's say, 1 piece of toilet paper that he folds each time that he can use to wipe the area. But let's say, hypothetically, if with one wipe of the toilet paper, the area would be clean, still, he is required to wipe 2 more times, and he's obligated to wipe 2 more times. Why? Because that's the minimum amount. The minimum amount, if the Muslim is going to use only toilet paper for Istinjā, is 3 times. So even if it's clean on the first wipe, he still has to wipe 2 more. And if it's not clean, let's say he wipes 3 times and it's still not clean, he keeps on wiping until he sees no traces of the filth on him. And if it happened to be that the number that he wiped and he saw no traces was an odd number, then it's recommended for him to wipe 1 more time to make it an even number. Because generally this is recommended.
To go from even to odd. Add 1 more to make it odd.
To end on odd. Now there are also other conditions that are necessary in order for it to be valid to make istinjā with the stone or the toilet paper. So that's why the author said, there are conditions to using the stones or what replaces them. The exiting najis filth did not dry. Once it dries on the outlet, then stones are no longer valid. One needs to use water for it to be valid. So basically if, let's say the Muslim, he urinated, he's sat on the toilet, he urinated, and he stayed sitting there, like many people do, subhanAllah, scrolling on the phone, until, let's say, the urine that was, let's say, left from the exit that was left on his private part after finishing urination, the drops that were left on his, where the exited from, since he sat there for a long time, they dried. So now since whatever came out of him dried, what does he have to do? He has to use water now. He cannot, it does not suffice him to use the toilet paper or the stone or the like. We have another question here. It says, for understanding the case of the wet wipe, it is invalid to use because it is not dry. Yes, it is. That's why. And then he says, and texture or wetness of the wipe would make the najis spread around the area that is being wiped. Yes, because since that wet wipe is wet, so it doesn't, let's say, remove the filthiness, and it doesn't remove the judgment of it being filthy, what he's wiping. It doesn't take it off. So it just becomes like adding something wet to the filth, and now that thing that was added, now that thing is filthy now. So wherever that was spread to, wherever that wetness was spread to, it's filthy wetness, so that part will also be contaminated. Now the second the second condition is for the najis filth not to cover more than the area of the outlet. Once the najis filth covers more than the outlet, one needs to use water for the validity of istinjā. This means for the urine not to exceed the tip of the penis in what concerns the man, and in what concerns the woman not to enter the area of intercourse. The place of intercourse means for the woman who lost her virginity. Usually this does not occur for the one who did not lose her virginity. Once it reaches that, water becomes an obligation. As for feces, it is not to spread past the natal cleft, that is the line of contact between the buttocks when standing. Once the feces cover more than that, then one needs to use water. So for this second condition, it's very straightforward. There's a certain area of the private part, both for the male and female, that if the filth spreads beyond that area, then it becomes an obligation to use water, and tissue would not be sufficient. So that area, starting with the man, is the head of the penis. So if, let's say the urine, let's say runs down the shaft of his penis, so now since it went beyond the head of the penis, in this case the man has to use water. It's not valid to use tissue alone. You would have to use water in order for the istinjā to be valid. For the woman, the area that if the urine, let's say, reaches there, that she would have to use water, that she's obligated to use water, and that tissue would not be sufficient, is the place of intercourse, the area of intercourse, and the vaginal opening. So when we say that for the vaginal opening, it's referring to the woman who lost her virginity. Usually this does not occur for the one who did not lose her virginity, and usually the urine does not reach to that area. But if it did, then she would have to use water. So that's for the woman, and that's for the front. So the man and the woman for the front. Now for the back side, for the man and the woman, it would be if the feces spreads beyond something called the natal cleft, which is, if you notice, let's say when a person, let's say squats, right, to use the bathroom, when they squat, their buttocks, there's a certain area that becomes apparent when they squat. And when they stand up straight, when they're standing upright, the buttocks, they become, let's say, like close together, so that area becomes concealed. So if the feces reaches to the area that is unconcealed when the human being is standing up straight, so now this is an obligation on that Muslim to use water for Istinjā. They cannot only use tissue, for example. The author said, once the feces covers more than that, then one needs to use water. On page 50, like that last word on the second to last line of the first paragraph, the third paragraph, and at the end of number 2, should have an S on it. Once the feces covers more than that, then one needs to use water. The third condition is that another najis filth does not join the najis filth that is exiting. If another najis filth comes on the outlet, one needs to use water. Or if a pure wet matter comes in contact with the outlet, then it is not enough to use the stone. Rather, one needs to use water. So here, what it means is that if a foreign, pure, non-essential or non-emergency wet matter comes into contact with the outlet, then now the Muslim has to use water to make Istinjā. So for example, if the person, let's say they had some oil on their brow, right? Like they moisturize their hair with olive oil. They put a lot of olive oil. And then as they're making Istinjā, for example, they're looking down and a drop of olive oil falls on the place where the filth is exiting from. So now he has to use water. He cannot use the tissue only. Or if any other pure wet matter that is not like something you cannot avoid. It's a pure wet matter that comes into contact with it, that's avoidable. Then the author said, if one wants to use either water or stones alone, then using water is better. So if the person, let's say they want to choose one over the other, or they have like only the ability to use one over the other, then if they want to do what's better, then they use water only. Using water alone is better than using stones alone, because water removes the physical entity and the traces. So it's better to use water alone as opposed to using stones or toilet paper alone. But it's permissible to use toilet paper alone even if you have water. And as long as these conditions that we mentioned are met. One avoids facing the qibla or turning one's back to it while urinating or defecating in the open land. This means if a person is urinating or defecating in an open land, not a place specified for defecating or urinating, it is sinful for him to face the Qibla or turn his back to the Qibla. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from facing the Qibla while urinating and defecating and from turning our backs to it. This was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. Now, if there is a barrier between the person and the Qibla, it is permissible to face or put one's back to it. This barrier needs to be 2/3 of a cubit high and away from the person 3 cubits or less. If one wears a jallabiyya, it should be another jallabiyya, and uses it as a barrier, it is enough. If one is defecating or urinating in a place that is built for that, i.e. the bathroom, then it is not sinful to face the Qibla or turn one's back to it, but it is makruh, disliked. As for Jerusalem, which was the Qibla for 17 months, it is not prohibited to face it or turn one's back to it because it is not the Qibla anymore. So like we mentioned, and among the sins of the private parts is to face or turn one's back to the Qibla if they're urinating or defecating when there is no barrier around him. So let's say the person was in the desert alone in an open field and he wanted to urinate or defecate. In this case, he has to determine which way is the Qibla so he doesn't face it and he doesn't turn his back to it. So let's say the Qibla was east, he was in an open land and he didn't have a barrier, then he could not face east or west when using the bathroom. He would have to face north or south. But if he is in an open land and he makes a barrier, like for example, a stick, or he, let's say, sits in front of a tree or behind a tree, and he puts a barrier so that he's not facing the Qibla, he's not turning his back to it, then in that case he is permissible. And the conditions of the barrier is that it has to be at least 2/3 of a cubit high. The cubit, from what I recall, is approximately 18 inches. So 2/3 of 18. That's the height that the barrier has to have. As for the distance away from the person that's using the bathroom, it would have to be less than 3 cubits. And 3 cubits or less away. So if it's more than 3 cubits away from the person who's making Istinjā, then it doesn't count as a barrier. This is all those details are pertaining to the case where the person is urinating or defecating in a location that was not made for urinating and defecating, so like an open field. But if he was in a place that was made for using the bathroom, like the bathroom or like the water closet, as they say overseas, then in that case, anywhere that he faces or anywhere that his back is turned, it's not sinful because he has that room or area that he is inside of. And regardless of if, let's say, the wall is not 2/3 of a cubit high or something like that, or if it's an enclosed space that the person uses for urinating or defecating. The author said, now, so that part that we mentioned, facing the Qibla or turning his back to it without a barrier in an open land is forbidden, it's sinful. So the person will get a sin for that. Now we're going to mention the rest of it is not sinful. It's disliked. The author said, one also avoids urinating or defecating in the still water. It is sunnah for the person not to urinate or defecate in the still water, whether it is a little or a lot, if the water is his. And if it's his water, and he wants to urinate or defecate in it, it's disliked. However, if it is owned by someone else, then it is sinful to do that without the owner's permission. Because it belongs to someone else, and if they would accept, then it's their right to not accept that, and if someone violates that right, they're sinful. As for the running water, if it is little, it is disliked, and if it is a lot, then it is not disliked. So, For the running water, there's a distinction made between if it's still or running. Also, it is disliked to urinate or defecate under a fruit-bearing tree, even when the tree does not have fruit, and even if it produces things to smell and not to eat. Let's read footnote number 35. It's beneficial, I think, and it's not too detailed where someone would get overwhelmed. Footnote 35. It is disliked to urinate or defecate under a tree that normally bears fruit, whether or not there is currently fruit on it or not, except if there is no fruit on it currently and one expects water to flow over the ground like rain before it bears fruit, then it is not disliked. The issue of that being disliked is if it is on land not owned by anyone or it is his own land. However, if it is owned by others, then it is sinful, obviously, because they won't accept that. The author said, even when the tree does not have fruit, and even if it produces things to smell and not to eat, because later the fruit might fall and be contaminated by filth, najis, and people would not want to eat it. Of course, if the tree is in the land of someone else, then he needs their permission. The author said, it is also disliked makruh to urinate or defecate in the street. Footnote 36, we'll read that one as well. There is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that gives the meaning that the one who urinates or defecates in a pathway or in an area which people take as shade in the summer, that people will damn him for what he did. Because of what he did, the people will damn the doer because of the smell and what he did. So, it is also disliked to do that. And it's disliked to urinate or defecate in the shade in the summer or in the sun in the winter. Yani, those are just specific examples, but any place where people seek to congregate. Let's say to avoid the sun, to avoid rain, to cool off, to rest, right? Someone wants to, let's say, think of like the past. And then you can imagine more in the past, but still you can imagine it today. But in the past, for example, travelers traveling on a journey, there's no hotels or gas station, and there's a tree, and they want to sit down in the shade, they want to cool off, they want to relax, they want to, let's say, eat something, and they come to this tree, and they're in the hot sun, they want to get out of the hot sun, they want to cool off. Because definitely when you're in the shade, especially in an arid climate, in a desert type of area, that shade feels like AC, and it's so nice. It's such a pleasant feeling to step out of the sun into the shade, especially when there's a nice breeze. So imagine this person wanting to feel that relief, and then they approach the spot and there's feces there, or there's the stench of urine. So the person that experiences that and finds that there, he might damn the one who did that. He might say, may God damn the person who urinated here or defecated here. The author said, it is disliked to defecate or urinate in these areas because the Prophet ﷺ said what means to avoid the two reasons that cause the people to damn the person who does them. They asked the Prophet ﷺ what they are, and he replied what means for one to defecate or urinate in the street or shady areas. Even a very narrow trail that people used to walk in is included. This was narrated by Muslim. It was narrated by Ahmed that the Prophet ﷺ told the people to avoid urinating and defecating in the place where people gather. Also, it is disliked to urinate or defecate in the hole, because this hole might be the home of a weak animal and it might be hurt, or it might be a strong animal and it might harm the person. One among the companions urinated in the hole, and it was the home of a jinn, and so the jinn killed him. Suddenly he fell down dead. Then the people heard a voice saying, we killed him. So it's just like to urinate in a hole that's already made. Because it could be the nest of a small animal that's weak, or a strong animal that will come out and kill you, or the nest of a jinn. And so that incident that happened with one of the companions who urinated in the hole, and then all of a sudden he dropped dead. And then all of a sudden the other companions, they heard a voice, and without seeing anyone, saying, "We killed him," so they knew it was the jinn. It is disliked makruh for one to talk without necessity while one is urinating or defecating. And then it's not forbidden. So you can talk without a need while urinating and defecating. Some people, they ignorantly think that it's forbidden to talk while you're in the bathroom, subhanAllah. A necessity or a need is like warning a blind person who is going to fall in a hole because he does not see it. So let's say the person, is using the bathroom in a way that, let's say, they can, from their vantage point, let's say, see someone walking and they're blind, and that person is going to fall in the hole if they don't get warned. And so that person who's urinating or defecating, he would call out to that person to watch out so that he doesn't fall in the hole. So this is a necessity or a reason to speak, so it will be disliked. The author said, one neither faces the sun or the moon nor turns one's back to them. To face the sun or the moon and to turn one's back to them while urinating or defecating is not makruh, but it is better not to do it. And this is known in the Islamic law as khilaful awla, meaning something that should not be done. But it doesn't reach to the level of it being makruh, disliked. That is khilaful awla. One shouldn't do it, but it doesn't reach the level of being disliked. There are other recommended matters that Abu Shujā did not mention. One sunnah is to be away from the people to the point that they do not hear the sound and do not smell the smell of the exiting najas filth. Though that's recommended to do. It is also sunnah to cover oneself so people do not see him. To cover the awrah is obligatory, and to cover the other body parts is sunnah, so the people do not see him. Ad-Daraqutni narrated that the Prophet ﷺ said what means, do not contaminate yourselves with urine, because most of the torture of the grave results from neglecting clearing oneself from urine. Al-Hakim narrated in Mustadrak the hadith that means, most of the torture of the grave is a result of not protecting oneself from being contaminated with urine. Note, it is disliked to urinate while standing except for an excuse. So basically, for this last one, it's among the enormous sins for someone to contaminate himself with urine. So this is an enormous sin, a huge enormous sin, and so Muslims should be careful when they use the bathroom, when they urinate. They need to make sure that they perform Istinjā properly so that they don't get any urine spots on their undergarments or on their body. So for the person to contaminate himself with urine, this is an enormous sin. And the Prophet ﷺ informed us that most of the Muslims who get tortured in the grave, it's as a result of them neglecting protecting themselves from being contaminated with urine. So something very important to do, especially for Muslim males. We're not like the non-Muslims. The non-Muslims, na'udhu billah, they urinate and immediately pull up their pants. Subhanallah. And sometimes even they defecate and they just pull up their pants. Na'udhu billah. But to do that is forbidden. There's also another sunnah that's not mentioned here, which is the sunnah of confirming or making sure that all the filth has exited from you. So basically it's sunnah for the Muslim when he or she urinates to clear their throat, to say, to clear their throat, or to cough, or for the male to gently, I don't want to say flick, but to gently, let's say, either like rub the shaft so that the remaining, let's say, urine that's in the shaft would come out, or they shake, I don't want to say, like shake the penis so that whatever's remaining comes out. But you can cough or clear your throat. And the same thing for women. So it's sunnah to do this as a measure, an extra measure. But if the person knows that if they don't do that, that the wudu remains until the silent and then eventually will come out and contaminate them, then it becomes obligatory to do it. And the last thing is that it is disliked to urinate while standing, except for an excuse. Because when the Muslim male, when he urinates standing, there is a high probability of splashback. So to avoid that, the Muslim, he should squat or sit when he's urinating. Except for an excuse, it would be disliked. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. By that we have finished the chapter of Istinjā and some of the etiquettes of using the bathroom. Next week, inshallah, we'll continue with page 54, a new chapter, the invalidators of wudu, the things that invalidate the wudu. If there are no questions, we'll conclude. If you have a question, just put it in the chat. طيب نهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم.